Next up, I'd like to introduce Curt Carlson, the former CEO of SRI International. While there, revenue tripled to $550 million per year, and tens of billions of dollars of new marketplace value was created, such as through Siri, an SRI spinoff that was bought by Steve Jobs at Apple. Can you please help me in giving a warm welcome to Curt?
I want to talk to you today about innovation. Surprise, surprise. And I'd like to start by congratulating our award winners and all of you in the room. Because you know, innovation is what's going to make the world a better place, and that's what you folks are all about. So congratulations to everyone here. You probably know Peter Drucker, the most famous business consultant, strategy person. Because the purpose of a business is to create a customer, the business enterprise has two and only two basic functions: marketing and innovation. It's what we're doing here today. So again, I celebrate all of you for what you're doing. I come from a company called SRI, where I was CEO for 14 years. It's a famous laboratory. It invented the modern PC interface and a lot of things that we use today. When I joined, it was in serious trouble. It was declining for 20 years. It was deeply in debt. It was close to bankrupt, going away. And when I left, we created the R&D part of it up to almost 600 million and 2,500 staff. But what I want to talk about today is we also created tens of billions of dollars of new economic value. So with our partners, everything we do with partners, we created Intuitive Surgical, a $60 billion company, Siri, which you now know on the iPhone. My team has won 2 Emmys, one for high-definition television, and lots of other things. So an organization that had been in decline for 20 years, all of a sudden was systematically creating multi-billion-dollar companies every 4 or 5 years. This conference proves that we're in the global innovation economy, and now innovation at the highest level occurs everywhere. We heard from Marcelo that we're in the best time for innovation also in the history of the world. I don't want to go through all these different areas, but every area you can think of today is just open to transformative innovations. Basically, nothing we dream about has happened yet. We'll talk about 5G. Well, the internet's not fast enough, it's not secure, it's not trusted, it's not ubiquitous enough. Basically, everything we want still is to be done. And as Marcelo pointed out, just that part of it's going to transform all of these other industries. We are blessed to be in the best time in the history of the world for innovation. Markets are still basically untouched. Most of the world still is in development. So we still have at least 4 billion people yet who have all the advantages that we have. So we don't have a worry about markets. Exponential technologies. You know, we used to talk about Moore's Law as being kind of the driver. Well, there's lots of AI technologies that are drivers. With artificial intelligence, the cloud, just Internet of Things, there are lots of exponential things that are going on that are transforming the world today. And I was at a conference with Jack Ma a couple of years ago, and he started out his talk just saying to 2,000 people, "You're all going away. You just don't know it yet. You're all losing money. You just don't realize it yet." But what he was warning them is what Marcelo warned everybody in this room about. The changes in technology and IT are going to transform just about every business. And he was saying to them, you're not looking out 5 to 7 to 10 years to see what's going to happen to your industry. And I think that's a real important lesson for all of us. We all know about Tesla, kind of a traditional company, build a really fancy, expensive car and sell it to rich people here in Silicon Valley and Hollywood. That's fine, that's a viable business model. Now they're trying to create a consumer product. That's a really tough thing, because now they're competing with every auto business in the world. That is a really tough thing to do. And we also know about Uber, where companies get attacked from the side. And when they get attacked from the side, there's really not much they can do. It's almost game over. And the Uberization of different areas, medical care, financial business. Lots of different areas now are being attacked in ways that were unimaginable even 5 to 7 years ago. What's happening with competition? Well, it's increasing. Surprise, surprise. You may know this curve. This is the curve of the lifetime of the top 500 companies in the United States. And the bumps are the business cycles, when companies last longer or go away. At the turn of the 1900s, companies would last for 75 years or so before they went away, and now it's down to 15 years. Some people think it's actually less than 10 years. You become number one, 10 years later, you're gone. Kodak went from number one to out of business in 10 years, and Nokia went from number one to out of business in just 7 years because they ran into Steve Jobs, who understood exponential technologies and things that they didn't and put them out of business. So I want to give you just quickly three ideas that transformed SRI. Work on important opportunities as opposed to interesting ones, having a common language for value creation, and ways to learn fast. Some people say the goal of innovation is to fail fast. Now, isn't that really a dumb idea when you think about it? The goal is not to fail fast. The goal is to learn fast. So everything you can do to learn fast is an advantage for you. I'm not going to talk about people today, but everything at SRI was due to really competent, passionate, committed people. Without that, none of this matters. So I'm not going to talk about that, but assume that's what was at SRI that made the transformation possible. We have a guidebook that we gave to all employees that basically explained the fundamentals of value creation. And now that I've left SRI, I'm working with the National Science Foundation, the National Academy, innovation foundations like Keene, and various universities, WPI and Northeastern, on how do we improve our innovative performance. So the first question we ask people is, what is innovation? So invention is something novel reduced to practice. That's like a patent. And as most of you know, most patents have no value. Innovation is the creation and delivery of new customer value in the marketplace with a viable business model. And I can't tell you how many presentations I've seen that have no viable business model. It often gets forgotten in the definition of what innovation is, and I'll come back to that. What do innovations look like? Well, this is kind of a funny one. What did you think the first time you saw a ketchup bottle turned upside down? You kind of surprised at first and go, what? And then you realized, whoa, this is really valuable, because instead of pounding at the end of a ketchup bottle and spraying it all over my buddies, right, I can just squeeze it and get the ketchup. So this isn't the biggest innovation of the world, but it's still an innovation. And that's one of our rules. If an innovation isn't surprising, hopefully a lot surprising in the beginning, it's probably not that significant. Do you know how many drone companies there are in the world today? Over 400. I listen to a drone pitch almost every week, and they have nothing new. They're not going to last. There's a value hierarchy that goes from commodities to products, services, experiences, and emotions. Nokia produced great, solid, cheap phones. And then Steve Jobs came along. He created better products, more convenient, with services, with experiences, and he branded the company as, you're a special person if you buy Apple products. And as you know, he created the most valuable company in the world because he understood the value hierarchy. Nokia didn't, and they went away. People often talk about known and unknown needs. So again, Steve Jobs is a great example of this. You know, he never interviewed clients. So people often are told, if you want, you must have at least 100 interviews with your potential clients, or you don't know what you're doing. He didn't talk to a single one. What did he know? He knew that people wanted convenience. And typing in numbers and things like that was very inconvenient. If he could transform that by creating a different paradigm for searching, he could create enormous value. Well, it turns out at the time, there were lots of surveys. People did talk to clients. And what they said they wanted was keyboards. They wanted a better keyboard. Well, Steve Jobs said, no, they don't want an incrementally better keyboard. What they really want is to transform how they interact with our devices. And that's what he did. told you we focus on, at SRI, on important things as opposed to interesting things. We don't want to do another drone company. By the way, I think there are about 600 electric vehicle companies now in China. How many of them are going to last? And the way we communicated this to our people is we said, well, just in a very simple way, think of the overlap of customers, capabilities, and competition. Where do you want to be? You certainly don't want to be in one or two. An enormous number of people say they want to be in three. In other words, they want to be in a space where there's already competition. And we never wanted to be there. We always wanted to be in a place where we could start out with a unique competitive advantage, which we call here in Silicon Valley the white space. And we always wanted to have a beachhead. Where can we get started with a product that's not exactly perfect and start to make revenue to be successful? And so we always wanted to be in the white space because that's how you can make an impact. And we also always focused on what are the few things that if we can understand them, not 20 things, usually there's only a couple things about the customer and a couple things about the product. If we can understand them, we can probably create a major innovation. Not 100 things, just a couple things. So here's an example. This young girl has multiple sclerosis. And if you were her parent, would you be happy with those crutches? I don't think so. You'd want a better way for her to get around. Well, as you know, in Japan, there's been a lot of work on robots. And the idea was, well, let's put a robot on the person, and that'll help solve the problem. Well, that robot weighs 20 pounds, and it lasts for 2 hours. Would you put that device on your little girl? Would you put that on your 85-year-old grandmother? I don't think so. The problem is, how do you attach the robot to the body? That's what needed to be understood. And finally, one of our folks said, how about a Chinese puzzle? You stick your finger in the right way, it grabs, you push it in the right way, you can pull it back out. And what would happen if we put a Chinese puzzle on each leg and had motion detectors so we could tell when to grab and then to let go? Grab, let go, grab, let go. And that led to that prototype. It's a pair of pants you stick on. It's kind of clumsy because it's a prototype. But that lasts for 10 hours, and if you wore that, you'd walk faster than anybody you know when you're going down the street. So that was the prototype, but that wasn't the product. Here's the first product. The first product is back pain. So the company is now focusing on how do you address that with an automated technology that actually provides dynamic support. And that was just selected as one of the top 50 new companies in the United States. Common language. So we think the most important concept in business is the value proposition. And we have a simple definition for it, simple in concept, but really hard to do. What's the need, the important customer need? What's the approach for your offering in the business model? What are the benefits per cost of the definition of the value? And how does that compare to the competition or the alternatives? Big important need, unique, compelling, defensible approach with the business model, superior by benefits per cost by 2 to 10 times over the competition or alternatives. 4 questions, but really hard. Many of you have started ventures. Have you ever been right when you started? I never have. I've done 20 companies and even more things for different companies. Never have we been right in the beginning, never. We've heard great pitches this morning about how people had to pivot and pivot and pivot to finally find a business model and a product that made sense. Long definitions for the value proposition don't make sense. What happens if you change one of these questions? What happens if you change the need? What happens to your approach? Your customer benefits and your competition, they all change. What happens if the competition changes? It comes up and changes all the other ones. So we started at SRI, every conversation started out with just these 4 basic questions. And I want to tell you, having an organization where everybody thinks this way is transformative by itself. Every conversation starts out with the customer. This is what we see most of the time. I listen to, like many of you, hundreds of presentations all the time. Most of the people want to focus on their approach. So hi, Curt, the need's obvious. I want you to spend 2 hours listening to my idea. The benefits are obvious and there's no competition. Has anybody heard a presentation like that? They're not useful. If you're a leading VC, you don't know what to do with that. You say, thank you very much. Go back and do some more work. And our rule, another one of our rules, is if you can't describe your value proposition, at least those 4 questions, you probably still don't know what you're doing. So the last point is, if you accept the fact that value creation is a learning activity, a learning discipline, then the question is, what can you do to learn faster? So at SRI, we had a process, kind of an incubation process. We call them value creation forums. And we'd have 4 to 6 teams stand up and present from 1 to 5 minutes, no more than that. And they would give their NABC value proposition. And they would do this every 2 to 6 weeks. And the presenter would listen and then be quiet and not argue back. Arguing back doesn't make sense because they stop listening, but also the presentations are always so bad, it wouldn't make sense to be arguing for the next hour when they really need to go and do a lot more work before they're done. And here's a little bit of magic that we learned and why complicated systems don't work. There's a thing called comparative learning. So imagine somebody stands up and they do NABC, just 4 questions, then the next person, 4 questions, 4 questions, 4 questions. And you can see, after a while, somebody does a really good job on the competition. Somebody does a really good job on the business model. Somebody really understands what customer value means. The teams learn from each other. It's called comparative learning. It's one of the most powerful ways you can learn. It's a little bit like an eye test, where the doctor goes A, B, A, B. The teams are going A, B, A, B, but now they're looking at the different value propositions, and they're learning how to solve all these complicated issues that we have. If we're going to create a venture at scale, it's going to make a difference that has a competitive advantage. It was our way to learn really fast. That's how Siri was developed. We spent years developing the technology. We couldn't form the company because we had no business model. We spent 2 years looking for a business model, just doing NABC value propositions. We finally figured one out. We went out and we hired what we considered to be the best team for that business model. Doug Kicklaus is the fellow in the middle. He's the CEO. And Adam Shire, who's spoken here, is one of the most brilliant AI guys in Silicon Valley. They formed the company. 2 weeks after the product came out, Steve Jobs called up Doug, the CEO, and our CEO said, you're not Steve Jobs, and he hung up the phone. Jobs called right back. He said, no, this really is Steve Jobs. So he said, I want to come over and talk to you guys. And that's how we sold Siri to Steve Jobs. By the way, we called up every other senior vice president you can imagine with all the big companies. None of them but Steve Jobs had any idea what we had done. And here's Steve Jobs in the lobby trying to convince our team to sell the company. And this simple idea that I've given you of important problems, NABC value propositions, and a way to learn fast was running through this entire activity. And if you want to know why it was that little SRI, who'd been failing for 20 years and about to go bankrupt, became able to create one multi-billion-dollar business after another, you've just learned some of the secrets, which are really, as you know, just the fundamentals of value creation. Thank you. I think I've made my 3 points.